saw a TikTok today because I love TikTok. I saw a woman who was at her house and she called her husband at work because the closet door was locked. And she just wanted to know where to find the key or what she should do about that. And the husband said, closet doors don't lock. And this woman was explaining in her TikTok that she thought she was in a different world because her husband just could not understand that the closet door locked. Whether or not it should have, whether or not that's the right doorknob, whether or not that's the right door. He didn't have any concept of that. She was just saying, I'm telling you the door is locked. And he's saying, no, it's not possible. And so all of the comments were, what did you expect him to do? He was at work, or how to open the door. And my initial feeling was, girl, he does not believe you. He does not believe your relation of the world. And I think this idea of not listening to women, it's not just men who don't listen to women. I think a lot of us just don't believe women's lived experiences. And that, to me, that's a huge red flag.
Yes. It sounds like what you're talking about is classic gaslighting. And we throw around the term gaslighting all the time in culture. Oh, don't let him gaslight you, or don't let her gaslight you. And I'm not sure that we're always talking about what gaslighting really truly is. So when I first learned about the term gaslighting, I went and actually watched the movie Gaslight, from which the term came. And in a nutshell, the movie was about a socialite woman who had money and clout and reputation and a big house, and she married a man that didn't have those things. And he married her for her money and her reputation and her clout and her big house. And he realized early on that the only way that he was going to attain those things from her, because even in the 1930s, that was really uncommon for a woman to have all those things over her husband. So the way that he would attain those from her was to slowly drive her crazy. And the way he did that, he did it in a number of ways, moving objects. And then when she would tell him about it, he would say, that's crazy, that's insane, that would never happen. And then the crux of it was he would sneak up into the attic where the control for the gas for the lights was. And he would sneak up there when she thought he was elsewhere. And he would turn the gas down and the lights would dim. And then he would turn the gas up and the lights would get brighter. And he would do this multiple times over a period of time. And she would tell him about it, and he would say, darling, I think you're starting to lose it, in the whatever 1930s or 40s terms. And she was starting to believe she was losing her mind. So the most devastating thing about gaslighting isn't just that you're being lied to. It's that you're being lied to with such a conviction that you start to doubt your own perception of reality. And you start to think that you really truly are going crazy. And then the insidious piece about that is that then you start to need to rely upon the person that's manipulating you to tell you the reality, to tell you what your reality is.
Seems to me like most things that gaslighting is actually a spectrum, where on one end it's insidious, it's malicious, it's intentional, of wanting your partner to not trust their own reality and to trust yours instead. I think on the other end of that spectrum is just the flat out not believing women, whether it's malicious or just ignorant or conditioning that men and women have faced, just not believing women. So I think we've probably all experienced someone on that spectrum. One side is really malicious and the other side is, I wouldn't say benign, but less malicious and more just society conditioning us to not believe women.
I tend to think that when you are being gaslit by a narcissistic type personality, it is malicious by its very nature. I do think that just us failing to believe women that's a conditioning. And I don't think that many of us do it maliciously, but some do. So I do find myself on occasion not believing women myself. And then I have to convince myself, believe women. And I really have to do sometimes some really deep diving into what it is that's preventing me from wanting to believe what they're saying. And it's a lot of times internalized misogyny that I'm still just shaking off because I haven't gotten rid of all of the conditioning. But I think most of us will find ourselves falling into that camp from time to time.
It's easy, A, because of conditioning to not believe women, but B, because women sometimes don't tell the truth, and that's just human nature. So it's hard to say to believe women 100% of the time, but I think we believe them a lot less than the actual reality.
Yeah.
So as an example, I brought up this thing about Lake Michigan with you and our mom a couple weeks ago, and both of your immediate response is that's not true. And we didn't take the conversation any further, but it was interesting to me how both of you said, no, that's not true. But not a lot of other details, just the conditioning of, nope, it's too extraordinary, it's too sensational, it couldn't be true.
Okay, so I don't think that that's about not believing you. I
No, not
think
me, the girl.
so I oh, so it was a girl that said that happened?
Yes, it was an adult woman who said that when she was 13, this happened to her. And what came out recently was the FBI tip sheet. So she called the FBI and said, I've talked to FBI before. How do I get in touch with you again? So it was her just relaying again her story.
Okay, so if let me just clarify since we're talking about this. It had to do with post-term abortion,
I hate
right?
that term. Infanticide.
Yes, so that I think that my not believing that didn't have anything to do with the person telling it. For me, it had to do with I'm not quite ready to let my brain accept that something that heinous could be going on top of all of the other heinous things that are going on. But I do get your point that we were both very quick to like, nope, nope, shut that down. I'm not gonna buy that.
It was
Also,
just an interesting thing.
I want to be extremely cautious about just jumping onto every conspiracy theory. And that sounded like a possibility that that was one of those, like, really, you're going to tell me that that's actually happened. And I don't want to just go like, well, I heard it. I heard it on TikTok, therefore it must be true. So there's a lot of layers to that.
More than fair. More than fair. So I think where my mind went, it brought me back to my teenhood. I was very involved in church. I'm not now, but I was very involved in church and youth groups. And at one point in my late teens, one of my friends came up to me and confessed to me that her father had been abusing her for a long time. And eventually, very quickly after that, we reported it and got her out of the house. Years later, when we were all adults, 20s or 30s even, years later, I heard from someone who was a common friend that she retracted her story and that it actually just wasn't ever true. And to this day, I don't believe that. I'm unwilling to believe that it was made up.
I agree with you. I don't think that was made up, especially because of all of the consequences that followed. Because,
Right.
especially at that time, nobody was believing girls. So if somebody
Right. Right.
believed, there had to be ample evidence
Right.
at that time.
Right. They don't just take it from their families for no evidence. Right. Right. It just struck me years later. Why are people still more comfortable saying, no, it's not true?
Because we then have to face the systemic issues that enable it. And people don't want to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So gaslighting, major red flag.
The thing I found about the gaslighting is that it always starts small. So it's, for me, when I was being gaslit over a period of years, the early instances of it, I would never have thought of it in those terms until years and years later when I'm putting it together in a bigger picture. One of the instances where I was gaslit, and it haunted me for most of my life. This has haunted me. I was in an intimate relationship. I was fairly young, so I wasn't yet quite comfortable in my own skin. And one morning, I was in the shower shaving, and it was a glass shower. And my partner came in and was brushing their teeth. And I was shaving my legs, and they said to me, "Why are you shaving your knees? Nobody has hair growing on their knees." And I was humiliated. First of all, one of the reasons a comment like that is extremely cruel is when you make a comment like that when a person is already being vulnerable in front of you. I think for me that's the ultimate cruelty is when you're being cruel and they've already become vulnerable. Secondly, I took it to heart, and for years, every time I shaved around my knees, I thought of that comment. It was in there. It was a seed. It was baked in there. And when I finally got out of that relationship, I took extraordinary amounts of joy in shaving my knees. All the way up and around, in every place where there is hair and where there isn't hair, I recognized it for what it was. It had nothing to do with hygiene. It was about saying something that would make me question reality and also doing it in a way that was extraordinarily humiliating. The thing about the gaslighting, because we're talking about red flags in relationships, the thing about the gaslighting when they're teeny tiny little ones like that is that they're testing the boundaries. If they can push a little bit on this one arena and you don't bend or break, then they keep pushing, then they keep pushing, then they keep pushing. And then over a period of months and years, those gaslights get bigger and bigger and bigger, but you've been conditioned to not respond to it. That's one of my examples of why it's so insidious.
So before you move on, can I ask a couple clarifying questions? Because where I am at my age right now and my confidence, if I had a partner who, when I was shaving my knees, came into the bathroom and said, people don't grow hair on their knees, I would say, oh, fuck off, and I'd throw a glass of water on them, right? But clearly that you had a different reaction as a young person and not as confident. And what did you interpret he was trying to say, that you're shaving your knees unnecessarily because people don't actually grow hair on their knees? Is that what he was trying to say?
He was trying to say that I was being ridiculous. That I was doing
Because you don't have
because
hair
I
on
don't
your
have
knees.
hair on my knees, but I'm shaving. Because you do, you grow hair up to your knee and up, they're around. And I just thought it was easier to completely go right around. So what I interpreted he was saying is he's going to save me future effort and embarrassment by telling me now that the truth is there's no hair on my knee, so that I don't have to do that down the road. It's also a measure of control, right? Because now every time I shave my knees for the next years, his voice is in my head telling me I'm ridiculous. And when you add those up over a period of time, you come to the conclusion that I'm ridiculous.
That's insidious.
It is. One of the other ways that I used to get gaslit regularly was my partner would say, all right, I'm heading out in about 10 minutes. And I would say, okay, where are you going? And he would say, well, I'm going to XYZ. I told you about this like 2 weeks ago. And I'd be like, oh my God, I don't remember you telling me about this. And he'd say, and you tell me I never listened to you. Clearly, you never listened to me. Now I look back and I realize he never had told me those things. He had never told me, because I was a person that took everything and placed everything in the back of my mind. I held so much stuff in the back of my head because I wanted to make sure that I knew what everybody's needs were, that I knew when they would need a particular thing in which order. So I kept all of that information. It would have been highly unlikely for me to just straight up forget that he would tell me that he's going to go on something that he doesn't typically do. I'm pretty sure I would have remembered if you were going to spend the weekend at a golf tournament, but he would say it as if he had told me. So it started then, not only in that instance, for me to question my reality, like, wow, did I really forget? But it also made me beat up on myself for being the worst partner in the world, because my partner told me something and I didn't remember it. I didn't hold on to it. What kind of a partner doesn't hold on to critical information like that about their partner? And so that was another place where that kind of gaslighting is insidious, because it makes you hate yourself.
Huge red flag.
Huge red flag.
But we don't see the little red flags that add up into the big red flag until we see it.
Yeah, and then once you see it, you can't unsee it. So tell me, do you
So the
have
corollary-
red flags in your history? Gaslighting red flags. Let's start with gaslighting.
The definition of gaslighting that we're looking at, which is making me doubt my own reality, I'm having a hard time thinking exactly of that. There are a lot of corollary behaviors, like not believing the importance of women's experience. I have one example of, during the Me Too movement, I was in a serious relationship and we were having a discussion about all of the false accusations. So when a false accusation came out and was difficult for a man to handle, my partner was saying, we need to be careful about Me Too because it could hurt the lives of innocent men. And I was shocked. The lives of a woman who has been sexually assaulted or had her career dependent on her sexual favors to somebody, all these women whose lives are completely gutted, destroyed, they have to live with this the rest of their lives, versus a couple of men who are going to be accused of something, and that would ruin their lives, and therefore we need to protect those men. So what I do right now, and since then, There's an idea called pink pilling. I'm not a fanatic about it, and I'm not a feminazi, whatever. I'm a very reasonable person, but I make sure that that person is pink pillable before I get in any kind of relationship with them.
Okay, say more about that.
So pink pilling is an idea of coming forward with data and research and studies and facts that we can point to that talk about the lived experience of women and how it is worse than the lived experience of men. And I'm talking in generalizations here. But as examples, crash test dummies are built for men, and female crash test dummies are scaled down versions of male crash test dummies. So it wasn't even until the 1990s or so that an actual female version of a crash test dummy was created, and that one in the 90s was a small male crash test dummy. Clinical research being treated in hospitals. I can't count the number of women who I know who have not wanted to go to the ER because they were going to be told that they are too fat, or that they're pregnant, or that they're hysterical, or that they need to lose weight, right? So these are the ways that women don't want to go to the hospital because they're discriminated against. The idea of getting an IUD with no anesthesia, where a man has a similar level of pain and they have opioids and they have anesthesia and they're put out completely. So just the pain management between the sexes. So I could go on and on and on, but it's this idea of pointing out the factual differences in the lived experience of women versus the lived experience of men. If someone is unwilling to want to hear those kinds of facts, then I can't be in a relationship with them.
That's totally fair.
So I'm a single mother of two, never had a partner. I had them on my own. So I've raised two kids. I'm a homeowner. I've owned 3 homes in my life. I have a PhD. I have a great job. I own a company now. And somehow when I get in an intimate relationship with someone, there's this immediate jumping to conclusions that I don't know how to do anything. Like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, let me come over and explain to you how to do it. I guess we'd call it mansplaining, right? I know how to do this. You can't possibly know how to do this. I had someone say to me once, my clothes were not getting dry in my dryer. And so it was probably a vent problem, or the dryer wasn't good, or I was overloading it, whatever it was. I would have figured it out, but I just mentioned casually, oh, my dryer's not working very well right now. And this genius said to me, well, how often are you changing the lid screen? And I'm thinking, well, how stupid do you think I am that I'm not changing my lid screen and thinking that my clothes are not dry because the lid screen is full? And so I said, I do it once per load. And without actually hearing that I said those words, do it once per load, which is a reasonable number of times to do it per load. No one's going to stop it in the middle and take the lid screen out. That's ridiculous. So once per load is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, I do it enough. And without even hearing the words that I said, he said back to me, oh, is that enough? He didn't even hear the words that I said. It was just an assumption that whatever was going to come out of my mouth was not the correct answer. And that really drives me crazy.
So that would be a really good red flag. To piggyback on what you're just saying is not being heard, not being seen. I was in a relationship one time that the person that I was in a relationship with would always be somewhere else while I was talking. Drifting on the phone, looking away, like I don't hear you. And besides it just being incredibly frustrating, because when you're in a conversation with someone, you want them to engage in some sort of way that says, I'm here, I'm listening to you, I'm with you. And I got none of that. But it conditioned me. And actually, I was in several relationships like this. But I was conditioned then to tell my story really, really fast. Like whatever it was I had to communicate, I better get it done in like 30 seconds to a minute, because that's the only attention span that they had. There is really difficult to get deeper in a relationship when you only can talk for a minute at a time on any given topic. There's just no growth there. So I would say not being listened to is a huge red flag, on top of being mansplained, because they assume you know nothing about anything when in fact you can do a lot.
I was in a lovely walk once with someone that I was dating, and it was getting serious, and I was feeling myself wanting to be a little bit more vulnerable with this person. And so I was telling him some serious things about my life, and we're walking down the street and I'm diving into this story and I'm thinking, okay, I'm comfortable with this person. And in the middle of my very vulnerable story, he turned and stopped and said, oh, look at these flowers. They're so beautiful. And my first reaction was, okay, I like dating someone who can appreciate the beauty of a flower, but also, dude, it couldn't have been worse timing. You just sort of shut me down in the middle of wanting to be vulnerable. And And thinking back now, saying this now, when I'm out of that relationship, maybe that was the purpose, is that he was not ready for me to be vulnerable.
I think it was more than that. I think it's another test. When they do that, because that's pretty classic as well, is to shut you down right in the middle of something vulnerable. I think it's a test to see how you're going to react. So I live not terribly far from Mall of America, which is the biggest mall in the States. And it is also one of the biggest trafficking locations in the country. It's where people hunt for victims. So I've been taught to teach my kids, and I did. I taught all the girls who ever hung around our house, I taught them this. When you are approached by a stranger, man or woman, doesn't matter. If you're approached by a stranger, particularly at Mall of America, and they give you a compliment, oh, your hair is so pretty. If you say, no, you're victim material. If you say, oh, thank you, they're done with you. They walk away and move on to the next. So the way that women and girls respond to those moments of belittling or those moments of compliment has everything to do with how vulnerable they think you are to future attacks.
Right? It always starts with these small tests, as you're saying. If only we could see those tests as the tests that they are, and that they will not stop. And you can either react to them and fix the relationship, or react to them and end the relationship, or you can go down the road until they become bigger and you're more conditioned to be susceptible to these red flags.
I wish that we would teach this in school because it is such a
Right.
prevalent problem. And it happens to both genders from both genders. But I do think that it is more prevalent in abusers against the abused, which tends to be men over women. So I wish that we would teach what these red flags look like, how to react to them, alternative ways to respond, like in that Mall of America situation. I taught my girls that when someone gives you any kind of compliment anywhere, anytime, you just say thank you. And that immediately will eliminate a huge chunk of people who are trying to see if you're victim material. Predators seek out victims who have already been victimized because they're easier to re-victimize. So I wish that we would teach it because I didn't learn about narcissism, gaslighting, these belittling tactics, the control, the manipulation. I didn't learn the language about it. I didn't learn how to spot the cues until I had gotten so tired of it after decades that I left. And here's how I came to this. I left a marriage of 30 years. About a week or two after the physical separation, I remember sitting down at the Google machine and I typed in, my marriage is over and I feel nothing. Because I was completely numb by that point. And it took maybe one or two clicks in to recognize that what I was experiencing was the aftermath of a narcissistic abuse. And that is what finally led me down the path of that rabbit hole of figuring out what narcissistic abuse looks like, what it is, how to spot it, how to combat it, different techniques for dealing with it in the moment if you should happen to be in relationships with people that you can't get out of immediately. So it was a huge life-changing event for me to discover this and to learn enough about it that now I can unsee it. So I feel very confident that I will never fall into that relationship again because now I can't not see it.
Hey, if you like our content, please like and subscribe and comment. It helps the algorithm and it helps us develop more material.
Thank you.
Love bombing. I was married very young. Everyone in our family got married very young, and I decided I had to do the same thing, but I wasn't married very long. When I decided I would leave that marriage, my husband had very long hair. I never liked it, and I wasn't requiring him to get a haircut, but he knew that I didn't like the long hair. So after I told him I'm leaving out of this relationship, he came back to my office with a haircut. because he thought that was going to be enough to change everything. And it's this idea of love bombing that everything is so great when you need it to be great, and then it slowly goes back to what it was.
Wow. Say more about love bombing, because that's a really critical piece, because that's the piece that gets you into the relationship in the first place. And a lot of women, I think, who finally figure out that they're in abusive or narcissistic abusive relationships think to themselves, I'm a smart person. How could I have fallen for this? But it's the love bombing. So say more.
I was once in a relationship at the very beginning of which we lived in different areas. And so we were texting constantly, and it was very flirty and very wonderful. And he actually texted me. He said, he just random text, dance me to the end of love. Oh, man, the moment, the swoon of it. And looking back now, who says that? Who says that in a text? It was just so over the top of romance and love and flowers and dance me to the end of love. It was very telling right now what that relationship was going to be like. The other piece of it in the beginning of a relationship, of course, one can be love bombed. But I think when things are difficult and we speak up for ourselves, then the love bombing starts, where they get the flowers that you want and they do the tasks around the house that you wanted and they compliment you more and they take you out for a little while until you start thinking, you know what, this man's changed and he's better and he's listening to what I want. And then over a very short period of time, things go back to exactly the way that they were before. So it's just enough to keep you satisfied and keep you from leaving and to keep you from thinking that this is going to be the rest of my life. They convince us that they have changed when in reality, it's very difficult to change.
So one of the questions that I had early on was, how do you tell the difference between like really deeply falling in love with someone who's right for you and love bombing? Because it feels the same. When you are love bombed, you feel like you found your soulmate. How do you tell the difference? And here's one really critical piece, is that if you are in a relationship that is soulmate-ish and this is your person, you know as much about them as they know about you or close to it. In a love bombing scenario, they don't tell you anything about themselves. And if you ask them questions about their life, they'll feed you just enough information to then move on. But the early stages of the relationship, where they are asking you all about your life and they're attentive and they're paying attention and they've given you cues that they get you, is because they're gathering the information they need to know how to entrap you. So if you're in an early relationship where they are learning everything about you and subtly and casually failing to tell you anything about themselves, that would be the red flag that it's a love bomb, not a soulmate. And one of the reasons why they don't tell you anything about themselves is because narcissists don't have a sense of self apart from the feedback that they get from someone else. So they can't tell you what they like, what their interests are, what their opinions are. They can only tell you what they think you're going to respond to, either positively or negatively. So their entire existence is a feedback loop off of you. So if you want to figure out if it's a soulmate situation, ask yourself, how much do you know about the other person? How difficult is it to get information from them? Are they open and freely sharing themselves with you? Because if they are, then it's more likely it's a genuine love. If they're really tight-lipped with those things and it's like pulling teeth to get information from them about their lives, it's more likely a love bombing.
So I've had 2 long-term relationships that were exactly the opposite, and that was that they knew that I knew everything about them, and they had 0 interest in anything about me, unless it was how it related to them. So I dated a guy who liked jazz, and he assumed that I liked jazz, and I really don't. But he thought that I loved jazz because he never asked me if I liked it or not. He says, "What do you want for dinner tonight?" And I would say, "I would love to have pasta." And he would say, "Oh, great, let's have oysters." So it was always about himself and have zero interest in anything about me, my preferences, my skills, my talents, my dreams,
So
nothing
let
like
me
that.
ask you this,
So
though. In that relationship, was that later in the relationship that it was like that, or was that from the get-go?
it was later.
Right. So if you think back to the early days of that relationship, was it more the reverse?
Yes.
So the early days were love
Yeah.
bombing. And then
Right.
what you're describing is slipping into that phase where they no longer have to pretend that they care. They've already
Right,
entrapped you, right?
right.
They've already entrapped you at that point. So there's no point in love
Right.
bombing you further unless or until you start to pull away and they can start to see that you're pulling away, then you'll get more love bombing.
Right.
So what was the second relationship
Interesting.
that you were describing?
It was the same. Zero interest in anything about me. That you could give them a quiz about me and simple things and they wouldn't know.
That's a huge red flag that you're already entrapped.
Right. Right. Another red flag that I cannot stand that is so easy to miss is no, I'm just
Ugh.
joking. Saying something horrible and saying, no, I'm just joking. People can deliver the most awful, slashing, burning insults. No, I'm just a joke. You're too
You're too
sensitive.
sensitive. You're crazy if you think it. That is a huge red flag. I think belittling is what that essentially is. Um, if you say something and it hurts another person, whether you intended it to or not, don't say that.
Right?
If someone says something to you and you genuinely can articulate that hurt me, and their response to you is was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? Run. Run for the hills because they don't care what you feel. So when I was doing all of the self-work, because this is what happens when you're in an abusive relationship, particularly in a narcissistic abusive relationship, you start to feel like if you do the inner work, you can save the relationship, right? Like something's very, very off. And you've been told, I was told for so many years that I was the problem. So I'm like, okay, cool. I will go to therapy. And one of the things that they tell you in therapy is don't attack the person when you're coming to them with an issue. So you don't come to them and you say, you're just cruel and mean. Instead, what you say is, I feel X when you Y, right? Classic therapy language. So I would come and I would say, I feel hurt when you play on your phone while I'm talking to you. A healthy relationship, the person would say, oh, I didn't even realize that. Sorry. I'll pay more attention. I'll try not to do that. What I got from mine was, well, I can't help how you feel. That's a you problem.
I feel like a therapist was setting you up
Because
to have your
I
feelings
don't think that
insulted.
therapists, when they're giving advice to solo people about relationships, I don't think they're taking into consideration that if you're in a narcissistic relationship, the rules have completely changed. You got to throw the regular, like healthy communication rule book completely out the window because it doesn't work and it just further cements you into the abuse.
I have a corollary. The idea that there's a subcategory of the joking problem, and that is turning everything into a sex joke, and like making a joke like you owe me sex because you had a headache a couple weeks ago, so you owe me sex tonight. Oh, husband was just kidding. You don't. But it's not. It's only the joking atmosphere because it's an awful thing to say. So someone wise said to me not too long ago, you do not owe anybody sex.
Mm-hmm.
You said that, and I love this.
Thank you.
And I completely agree with you. But this, if someone could come to me and say in a relationship that I did this for you, I did the thing, and so then you owe me some sex. It's not a joke. You're actually making it sound like I owe you sex. And that's how it's done. That's one of the ways to get away with it is to make it a little bit of a hee hee, a flirty. No, it's a red flag.
Okay, so since you brought it up, let's talk about this. Do you owe your partner sex? My answer is
0, no.
1,000% you do not owe them.
1,000%.
But
No.
when you got married, this was part of the agreement. No, you did not agree to give your body to somebody who you no longer trust. Because if you're at a point in your relationship where you just don't want to have sex with your partner, there are so many other things that are going on in that relationship that are apart from sex. And sex is just sort of the casualty to all of the other things that are going wrong. And usually those things that are going wrong include a breach of trust of some sort. Not necessarily an infidelity, but a breach of trust. Like, I no longer trust you enough to want to be vulnerable with you in that sort of way. And so once that happens, it is near impossible to engage in sexual activity and not feel some kind of pain or hurt about it. So that's one of the
Exactly.
things that I hear is, oh, but you were married, you agreed to it. The other argument that I heard regularly was, well, if you don't give your partner sex, then they're going to have to find it outside of the relationship. Bullshit. That's a bunch of bullshit. I was extremely clear in my relationship with what I needed in order to feel safe and be willing to be vulnerable in a sexual situation. At that point, there was so much else going on. And I said repeatedly, I need to feel heard. I need to feel respected. I need to feel like we have some kind of an emotional connection. And this one refused to open up to me, refused to be vulnerable in front of me. And so my response was, if you can't offer me a vulnerability, then you can't ask me to offer you a vulnerability. Right? So what I needed was
Exactly.
emotional vulnerability. What they needed was physical vulnerability. And you can't expect one and not the other. So that whole argument about that they're going to go outside the relationship, no, they have a choice to seek it
Yes.
inside the relationship and to do the work that it takes to make sure that that relationship is healthy and whole and nurtured so that that can take place in the relationship. And if they choose not to, and they choose to go outside the home to find that, that's not on you because you withheld sex. That's not on you. That's on them. It's a choice they made to do that.
But if there's a man who wants sex from his wife, devoid of any other kind of commitment, support, emotional intelligence, emotional availability, connection, if that's all he wants is the physical act of sex, then he probably should go elsewhere to end that relationship, because that's not a relationship. That's I can't even describe it. That's not a relationship.
That's an enslavement.
Yes, thank you. I was gonna go there.
I mean, it
Good
is.
for
It
you.
is. That's what that is. Yes, but I would also caveat that if they're going to make that choice, for the love of God, end the relationship first and then go seek that elsewhere. Most people don't do that. They go seek it elsewhere. And I don't know, they live in some kind of fantasy world where they think that this is just going to last forever, that they're never going to get caught or found out. Or if they do get caught or found out, it's just going to be smoothed all over. And what I'm hearing, I TikTok quite a lot too. And of course, the algorithms are going to feed me what I want to hear. But I am hearing a shit ton of women who are, when they get to that point and they discover an infidelity, or when they finally come to that aha awakening moment of like, this is never going to change, they're just leaving. Just straight up, I'm walking.
Right.
Like there is no more
Right.
energy, time, desire to invest more into trying to fix something that is fundamentally unfixable. So I think men are going to have to start to get used to, okay, since we're just doing this, we're just going to go down the road. It's men and women. Okay. It isn't always, but for the sake of our conversation, it is. So I think men are going to have to get used to this idea that they're not going to be able to just get away with everything. And in the past, they could get away with infidelity because what's she going to do? Go get a job? She can't get a job. Go get a bank account? She couldn't get a bank account, right? In the 50s and 60s, women couldn't have their own bank accounts. They were completely dependent on men, so men could do whatever the hell they wanted because there was no option for getting women out of that. And the shift that I'm starting to see in our culture today is an explicit effort from white Christian nationalist men, an explicit effort to push women back into that dependence because I think they were getting tired of being held accountable for their actions. And as long as women are dependent upon them, they can do whatever they want. And if women are independent, then they have to step up and show up, and they have to be equal partners, and they have to no longer be taking advantage, and they have to no longer be expecting all of the effort and the emotional labor to be done by one partner while you just like kick back and have your big piece of chicken while you're watching football on the couch. Women don't need that anymore. We don't need men badly enough to put up with that crap anymore.
I propose that we talk on one of our next podcasts about the male loneliness epidemic, because I've got stories.
Okay.
For sure. And it's definitely a corollary to the red flags in a relationship. I mean, the red flags in a relationship, now that women are seeing those more, men are realizing that they have to bring more to the relationship. So back to red flags in a relationship, which other ones have you experienced?
Being belittled in front of other people is a huge red
That's the
flag.
worst.
So I had a relationship where I was belittled a lot at home, let's be honest. But it got substantially worse when we were in front of other people that he wanted to impress. particularly my dad. So when my partner and
Yep.
my dad were together, they were relentlessly cruel to the women in their lives.
Oh, but it's
But
just
it's
a
just a
joke.
joke. Oh, I was just really, I used to particularly get irritated with, like, do not call me the wife. Never, never call me the wife, because it was like the dog. I'm going to walk the dog. I'm going to appease the wife. Like, don't do that. The other one was ball and chain. You know, as if being in a relationship with me was so terrible, it was like being imprisoned. Then walk. Y'all go. You know, at some point I finally was like, yeah,
Right.
I'm out, because if that's, and those kinds of things didn't just make me feel bad because that's what I thought he saw. But when I started to look at myself through their eyes, I didn't like this person. I didn't like who I was when I was with them. Part of the reason I finally left was to recover myself, to rediscover the self that I could love and like. Because I had been so conditioned to believe that I fucking sucked, that I was prison, that I was a chain, that I wasn't offering enough sex, that I wasn't, you know, good enough. I wasn't enough. And a lot of that comes out in when they're belittling you in public and when they're belittling you in private.
I think there's a certain amount of give and take, and we might adapt to maybe watching a sports show that we never would have watched before, things like that. Just giving a little give and take in our relationship, I think, is perfectly normal within keeping our own identity. But when it gets to a point of changing our personalities or starting to hate ourselves and the way we're behaving in that relationship, then that's a huge red flag as well. So changing too much of yourself, pretending to like things you don't like, putting up with things that are just eating at your stomach in order to make sure that that other person is happy, that's a red
Oh, that's a
flag.
really good one. That's a really good one. Yes. Yes. I think there is a lot of, and that's not give and take. That's just give until you're empty.
Right, or until you start changing as a person. And that's not growing as a person. Yes, growing together, growing different directions, all of that is going to happen. But shifting who you are and who your fundamental values are to make sure that person is pleased it's not healthy. It's not you committing to the commitment. It's you being unhealthy in that relationship.
Yeah.
And I don't mean
I
you,
think one of the other challenges of what made me stay in a toxic relationship as long as I did was the purity culture. And this
oh,
whole
right.
message, I know we could talk hours on the purity culture, but this whole message of, see, ever since childhood, we were taught to believe that you're going to grow up, you're going to fall in love, you're not going to have sex until you're married. And then once you marry that person, you've committed for life. And then you listen to people in their 70s and 80s talk about how difficult some of the years were and how they just had to slog through some of those difficult years, and now they're the happiest they've ever been. So they're selling this lie that a toxic relationship can ever turn not toxic. So what they were talking about, which is getting through the difficult years, yes, every healthy relationship is going to have its turbulence, but when you're in a toxic relationship, that's never going to get better. But we're fed this lie that if you just hang in there long enough, eventually you're going to sit on the porch together and rock on the porch and watch the sunset. It's just, that's not going to happen in a relationship with that many red flags.
There was a promise of growing old together, of course, but then we grew up in the 80s and there was this epidemic of this horrible family destroying D word, the divorce, that up to half of married couples are going to get a divorce. And that was the worst thing you could possibly do. And there's religious doctrines against divorce. There's definitely a societal component against divorce. And I think, again, that was built for keeping women in line. I'm happy to say that I feel like the idea of getting a divorce is much less stigmatic than it was when we were growing up. I was talking to a friend of mine this morning about a couple friends of ours, and she is in a miserable spot. She's got this mega political husband who doesn't agree with her and is pushing her to go with him, and they have difficulty when they travel. She's raising 3 kids, basically. So she keeps talking about how difficult things are. And my friend I was talking about them with my friend said, "Well, she can't get out of it." And I said, "Well, she can get out of it, right? That she does have an option. Yeah, it's gonna be messy, but is it worse than what she's doing right now?" So this idea of, well, you have small kids and so you can't get a divorce, or you just got married so you can't get a divorce. You've been married 2 times and so you can't get a divorce. This idea of not being able to get a divorce for whatever reason, I think that's another way to trap women in a toxic relationship. If you're in a healthy relationship and you get married just to get married and don't really want to stay, then don't get a divorce or don't get married. But to get out of a relationship that's not good for you, that's significantly not good for you, it's okay to do that. It's the right thing to do.
And I think back then, when you're talking about in the 80s and 90s, this narrative that divorce is destroying American families,
Mhm.
it left out a huge component, which is that toxic relationships were destroying nuclear families.
It was
You
the
know,
women's fault,
and
though.
a lot of us were taught, you know, just hang out, hang in there. When I was in college, a lot of my college friends' parents got divorced because they were waiting till the kids got out of the house.
Yes.
Waiting, 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 waiting. I was, like, sort of in between, like, 2 of mine were already out of the house, and 1 of mine was almost out, and 1 was quite young. And now, looking back, I wish to God I had figured this out sooner and gotten my kids out of the toxic relationship much, much younger, because all of the damaging lessons that I taught them being a codependent, let me rephrase that. All of the
Thank you.
all of the damaging lessons that they learned because of the toxicity in the relationship, they got in their formative years, and now it's almost like too late to show them a different way. I mean, it isn't. I'm showing them a different way. I'm showing them a healthier way to be. But their core is already set in stone, right? Like their conditioning from childhood is already there. They're going to have to do extra hard work to overcome the lessons that they learned in a toxic relationship. So I wish that I had left sooner and gotten myself healthier sooner so that I could teach them a better way when they were younger. So they just
But here's
this
the
whole wait
truth.
until till they're out of the house thing. Don't don't make
Not
that
good
your
for the
one
kids.
thing that keeps you in.
Because here's the truth about the kids. They see you much more than they hear you. So you might think you're hiding this, you're hiding that, you come out with a tear and you wipe it off and they don't see it. They see everything. They see the red flags. They see you putting up with the red flags. They see you bending around to try to get those red flags hidden from them. They see it. And by you not seeing them and not reacting to them, you're teaching your kids to also put up with these red flags.
Yes, what they learn is normal in childhood,
Right.
becomes their normal. Like it normalizes the toxicity when there's no pushback to it in their formative years. So this is their normal. This is normal to them. When one parent does this against the other parent, that's normal. That's baseline for them now. And so to move to healthy is going to take extra effort on their part, if they even ever want to or can even move towards health.
As we come to a close in this hour, I want to point out that I am very hyper aware that there are good men out there. The anthropology rock meme that went around TikTok for a while, there was one video of this woman who was married to just a gem of a man who watched her open up this present as a joke to say that she's going to spend $200 or $400 on an anthropology rock. And she opened it up and the husband was just like, "Oh, that's really pretty. Yeah, good. That's really pretty." And then she says, spent $200 on it. He's like, "Oh, that's a good deal." And then she told him it was a joke. And he's like, "Oh, but it's a pretty rock and you really enjoyed it." Okay, there are men out there who can be what they need to be for a healthy relationship. And I'm hyper aware of it. Steve from Blue's Clues, he'd be great in a relationship.
1000%.
You all deserve someone like Steve or the anthropology rock guy who supported his lovely wife.
Yeah, 100%.
There.
Here's
No.
the other thing that I don't think we've ever really talked about, which is there's a trope of the divorced woman. And the trope is that she is bitter. That divorced women are bitter. Like, steer clear of divorced women, they are bitter. And one of the things I did when I was very first divorced was tried so hard not to put out that air of bitterness. But at its very core, I am so fucking bitter. And I'm not bitter because I'm divorced. I'm bitter because I was married to that toxicity.
Society telling you that you're bitter because you got a divorce is a red flag.
Yes, it is.
If there ever was a red flag, that's a red flag.
It is. And
you don't need to be told that you're bitter. You can be upset and angry and all the things that you are. And that's right.
It is right. It's not the divorce that makes us bitter.
Laugh.
The divorce,
FYI.
the divorce is what's healing. Healing us, but you have to go through the bitter phase before you can get to the healing. And so obviously it's going to go divorce, bitterness, work, healing. That's the order it goes in.
Even calling it bitter is one of those words like spinster. There's no bitter ex-husbands, but they're angry, they're hurting, they're suffering.
Thank you. Okay.
It's
divorce,
not bitter, it's
hurt,
healing.
Anger.
Which is a normal journey that everyone should go through and be allowed to go through without being called bitter in the middle of a
I think honestly
journey.
That itself is, like you said, one of the red flags that is intended to keep women from expressing their full anger. So here's the thing, we should talk about this in another episode too. Women's anger is right now incredibly critical. It's necessary and it's terrifying to men. So a lot of the red flags that we have talked about and a lot of the ways that society has pushed women down, it is to quell their anger, because when women are angry and then we use our voices and our power, it is terrifying to men. They are used to having all of the power because they're physically stronger. That doesn't matter anymore. But if we use our anger and our power to enact change in the world, those men that are striving so hard to maintain their power are fucked. Because we are powerful, and our power comes because it comes through our anger.
I think we need to look very carefully at our mission here. Our mission is to share our wisdom, share our stories, to allow people to have a growth journey. And if we avoid some of our anger, our bitterness, our weaknesses, our frailty, our vulnerability, if we avoid all those things, we completely miss that mission.
Yeah. And I think that
if there are bitter men who say, "Oh, it's just those bitter divorced sisters," I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
because
the tropes are intended to make us not want to do that, right? The tropes are intended to shut us down, and I think that you and I are done being shut down. We're just done. We're over it.
We're done being shut down.
And I really do hope that our stories and our voices can help other women who are still wrestling with the question of, what do I do with this? Like, now that I'm in a relationship that has red flags, now what do I do with this? I hope that we can help those women to move forward. And I'm never going to stand on a soapbox and tell you, that's a toxic relationship, you need to get a divorce yesterday. That's not my business. That's not my business. But what I do want to participate in is empowering you to continue on your own journey toward whatever healing and health and wholeness looks like for you.
Absolutely. Even if women get in our comments and start saying those are bitter sisters, I don't care, because we need to be who we are. And calling us names, I really don't care. Yeah. I have a mission. I feel just as strongly about people getting out of toxic relationships as I do is got to sew some pockets into pants for women. I feel strongly about both of those things. That doesn't make me a bitter.
Yeah.
I'm bitter about my pants not having big enough pockets. Just authenticity and passion.
If you are liking our content, please like and subscribe. It's free. It helps the algorithm. And if not for us, do it for the dogs.
Thank you.